Hello, how are you? This is the one time of the year that I make a video diverging from just talking about books to talking about movies, because I watch a lot of films as well as reading a lot of books. So I always enjoy looking back over the course of the year to see which are sort of my favorite and then talking about them and sharing them with you, because I want to know about your suggestions about what are the favorite things that you've watched over the course of this year, which is, it's more important, I think, this year to be talking about this than normal, since a lot of us have been spending a lot more time at home watching things rather than going out and seeing people. And so it'd be really valuable to hear your suggestions. But I want to give you some of my suggestions of my favorite things that I've watched that are a mixture of new films and old films, because I've been watching a lot of old films as well. And normally I go to the cinema a lot over the course of the year. I don't know how much, but usually probably at least 80 times or so to go to the cinema, and haven't been able to do that as much because they've been closed a lot of the time. And just recently the theaters were closed again here in London, because London went into tier 3. And so I did make a final trip to the cinema before they closed again to see the new film Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which was an adaptation of a play that was on the National Theatre, I think, here in London, which I meant to go see the play when that was out, but didn't get a chance to. And I thought this was a really wonderful film version of that. I mean, you can tell that it was a play, but there's such extraordinary performances in it. Viola Davis is extraordinary. She's wonderful, and yeah, really evocatively brings to life this blues singer from 1927, and basically records a recording session when they were making an album of some of her songs. And also it's very poignant because it's Chadwick Boseman's last performance, since he very tragically died way before his time, and his performance in this is extraordinary as well. So what a talent we lost in that. I mean, I wouldn't say this is one of my favorite films of the year, but I think it's definitely worth watching. It's really movingly done. So I'm just going to go through probably 30 or so of films that I've really loved. So first off, there is Uncut Gems by which has Adam Sandler in it, and I wouldn't have guessed that an Adam Sandler film would be one of my favorites, but this is so fast-paced and gripping, and the way it's told of this jewelry seller that gets in debt, in gambling debt, and his harrowing journey to try to scramble to save his life, basically, through a series of mishaps. And and it's so gripping and wonderfully done, and I'd really like to rewatch this. There is also 1917, a really gripping war epic, again, which is just mesmerizing, the way it was shot in all this one continuous take, as you follow this journey of two soldiers through this perilous journey across war-torn country, and yeah, it was so grippingly done. There's I Lost My Body, which is an animated film about a hand that's been detached from its body on a journey across Paris to reunite itself with its body, and which sounds very strange, but is strangely moving the way it's done. I thought it was so poignant and really lovely, and it's such a moving story and really creative as well. There was also Parasite, which won the Oscars this year, and this breakout film from South Korea that's just taken the world by storm, and it's so wonderful to see how well it's done, because it is such a great film. I mean, it's very atmospheric and tense, and a really gripping story of these scam artists that sort of infiltrate a house, a family of scam artists, but then there's a big twist, and the story goes in a way which is so wild, and it's another film that I really want to rewatch over this season. Then there is Juliet of the Spirits, an older film from 1965, directed by Fellini, and I saw it for the first time, and this was before cinemas shut, and so I got to see it in cinemas, and it's such a bombastic, really elaborate film, the way it's shot, and there's so many beautiful costumes in it, and it's really over the top, and the whole it has a dreamlike quality to it. It's basically about a woman who's being cheated on, and it's following her story as she interacts with a number of individuals sort of surrounding her husband and people that she knows. But yeah, the way it has a like dreamlike structure, and it's just so wonderful. I just loved it. It's yeah, I'd really recommend going back and rewatching this older film, because I thought it was so extraordinary. I mean, of course he's hailed as one of the great masters of cinema, but like rightfully so, and but this is a film that I hadn't heard of as much before, but I think it's wonderful. Then there is End of the Century, about two men who meet in Barcelona and have an affair, and then they realize that they had met 20 years previously, and so it's sort of, it does this interesting thing with time, looking back on time and our identities and our relationships with people over time. And I thought this was a really movingly done film, and yeah, the really interesting story, the way it's done, a very unusual story. Then going back to an older film, which is The Heiress from 1949, and another great actor that we lost this year, Olivia de Havilland, stars in that. And this is an adaptation of a Henry James novel, Washington Square. I thought the way it portrays the story of this woman that is an heiress, obviously, who gets in a relationship with this man that tries to marry her and cheat her out of her money, and her struggles between him and her father, her very domineering father, and yeah, how she tries to seek independence for herself throughout this. It's the first time I saw this film, and I thought it was extraordinary, and yeah, really, it's excellent. it's a yeah, just such a gripping film that's really beautifully told. Then there is another older film, which is Up the Down Staircase, which stars probably my favorite actress of all time, Sandy Dennis, and this is a much lesser known film. It's from 1967, and Sandy Dennis stars as a teacher that starts a job at an inner city school, and her difficulty trying to connect with her students, and but more than that, manage the overbearing structure of the administration of this school, and her navigating this perilous territory of this educational system, and it's so moving how it's done, and how she eventually strikes up relationships with some students. It's sort of like Dangerous Minds with Michelle Pfeiffer, but an earlier version of that, and I think a better version of that. And yeah, and Sandy Dennis, I think is just incredible. Her the way she emotes while being very tightly contained, I think, is extraordinary, and she's a wonderful actress. I'm probably most famous for her performance in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, where she I think she won an Oscar for that performance, and yeah, which is a wonderful film as well, one of my favorite films. And then another older film, well, not as old as that, is Chungking Express from 1994, directed by Wong Kar-wai. A story of two different individuals, but is so creatively told. It's really emotional and fun and playful, and does such wonderful things with music. The way the music kind of reflects the character's mood and emotions is so well done, and yeah, I just love this film so much, and I've seen it a number of times, but really enjoyed rewatching it because it had been quite a while since I rewatched it. I also rewatched Phantom Thread, Paul Thomas Anderson's great film from only a few years ago, that was out in 2017, and is so extraordinary. I thought it hit me even more emotionally this time than the story of this tense relationship of a very uptight dressmaker and a woman that enters his life who seems like she'll just be another of his passing romantic relations, but then she sticks with him, and yeah, and the story of how she slightly sort of transforms him in his tense relationship with his sister, and which, yeah, it's so well done. Then I rewatched I saw for the first time a film which I think is one of my new favorite films, which is The Whales of August, a film from 1987 starring Bette Davis and Lillian Gish, and obviously them much later in their careers and they're very old at this point, and they're in a house in Maine, and it just sort of follows their story over the course of the day. And the most dramatic thing has happened is about this decision about whether they're going to get a picture window looking out over the ocean. But I've discovered that this is my favorite genre of film. Basically, is older women looking out over the ocean and sort of reflecting on their life. I also rewatched Ladies in Lavender this year, which is sort of the same sort of concept, and I find it so emotional and moving. Just an older woman looking out over the ocean and reflecting on her life, and not even necessarily saying anything, but just sort of looking out at the ocean. I just think that is so moving, and yeah, and the way this story, this very low-key story, portrays their relationship of these sisters and the various people in the community that come to their house, and I loved it so much. So yeah, I'd really highly suggest seeking out this film. Then there is a new film that was out this year called Never, Rarely, Always. No, sorry, I always get this wrong, the order of the title. So it's Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, which is the story of two friends, teenage friends, who and one of them finds out she is pregnant, so she goes on a journey to get an abortion, and it's that story. And yeah, the way it portrays their relationship and her decisions and her backstory, but is so movingly done, and the challenges she encounters and the troubles she comes up against over the course of this journey, I think is just incredible. It's a very, very moving film. Then there is another older film, which is Big Night from 1996, about an Italian restaurant, and this is much more of like an indulgent film, but also wonderfully told. It's a story about family, two brothers that run an Italian restaurant in New York City, and how they're struggling to keep this restaurant going. So they plan this big meal to hopefully raise awareness of the restaurant and get more customers back. And one of the brothers is Stanley Tucci. It's an earlier role of him. He looks much different. And he plays a very different character than the kinds of characters he's been playing in recent films. And yeah, it's so well done. It's a very moving story, as well as this wonderful celebration of food. And I just enjoyed watching it so much. Then there is a film called Clemency, a new film from this year starring Alfre Woodard, and she's extraordinary in it, playing a prison warden who's supervising, overseeing people who go on death row, which is a very controversial subject. And the way this is portrayed is so moving and powerful. And yeah, I thought this was an extraordinary film. It's a very tense and very somber film, but very moving and very powerfully done. Then I watched for the first time a film from 2016 called Other People, and I think this is my favorite film that I've watched this year. It's sort of crazy that I didn't really hear about it at the time. I think it must not have got a big cinema release, or maybe not any cinema release. But I thought it was extraordinary. It stars Jesse Plemons and Molly Shannon, who he's an adult son who goes back to help care for his mother, who is suffering from cancer, and it follows the final year of her life. And it's so movingly done. But it's also him going back to his hometown, and he's sort of struggling in his life. His relationship with another man has recently ended, and he's nervous about telling his family that this relationship has ended, and how his career as an actor and comedian isn't really going so well, and he's nervous to talk about that as well. So it's him sort of reassessing his life, as well as connecting with his mother in the final year of her life. And it was so beautifully done, really emotional, but also really funny. So I was laughing as much as I was crying throughout this film, but I really I just had so many emotions throughout this movie, and I just thought it was incredibly done. I really, really recommend watching it and seeking it out if you haven't watched it already. I'd really like to rewatch it sometime, because yeah, I thought it was just incredible. I also went back and rewatched John Waters' classic film Hairspray from 1988, starring Ricki Lake, and I think this is the newer version of the film is fun, but it sort of makes me a bit sad that a younger generation is mainly only familiar with the newer film of Hairspray, because the original is so much better. The music in it is incredible. It's so good, and there's so many great actors in it. There's Sonny Bono and Debbie Harry is hilarious in it, and and Ricky Lake is excellent. It's so good and really funny, but also really moving, and I just love it so much. The film Saint Francis is a new film from this year about a young woman who is sort of wayward in her life and doesn't really know what to do. She becomes a nanny but isn't really all that interested in it and doesn't really like children all that much. But she strikes up a surprising friendship with the 6-year-old that she watches after. And this the way it looks at her life and the life of the 6-year-old's mothers, and is really moving and well done. And so I'd really recommend that new film. And I went back and rewatched the wonderful film Shortcuts, directed by Robert Altman from 1993, which has such an incredible cast to it. There's so many great actors in it, and this is a compilation of a number of Raymond Carver short stories which have been sort of mixed together so that the stories sort of interlap with each other, and it's so well done, the way it moves from story to story and the way they interact with each other. It also has a bit part cameo from Alex Trebek in it, who is another great person that sadly died this year. But it's so funny watching this in the UK, because in the UK people aren't really familiar with Alex Trebek, and so when I've watched this with English people in the past and Alex Trebek comes on and I'm like, oh, it's Alex Trebek, and they're like, who is that, what? And then but it's funny how they just sort of see him in the audience, and the actors in the film are talking about him like that's Alex Trebek, and so it's just this sort of weird different levels to it. I'm watching it in the UK, but it's a wonderful film. It's quite long, but it's really gripping, wonderfully told. If you've not seen this before, definitely go watch it, because it's an incredible film. Then there is Boys State, a recent documentary which is really wonderful. It's a documentary about a group of boys in Texas who go on this sort of camp where they have mock elections, and so it's to train them about the political process and how it works. And so they hold these series of mock elections, and it's basically a microcosm of the country, of different attitudes in the country, of how it comes out in these different boys' opinions and their different political campaigns that they hold in these mock elections. And there are some individuals in it that really stand out and come forward as really extraordinary and hopefully future politicians, because they are so good. And I really enjoyed this documentary. There is also Rocks, another new film which I luckily got to see in the cinemas, so I think it's on Netflix and so easily available, but is about a teenage girl who has living in London and has a younger brother, and her mother has a lot of issues and one day just sort of abandons them, and they don't know when or if she is going to come back. And so how the teenage sister is trying to care for her younger brother, and it's about her relationships with their friends, but also just trying to carry on with their family life when their mother has abandoned them and their father isn't on the scene, and so her trying to be independent and really struggling to do that. And it's such a moving story. It's really beautifully told, and so I'd really recommend watching this as well. I watched I'm being so camp in some of my choices, because then next I watched for the very first time Bette Midler's film The Rose from 1979, where she plays a famous sinner who is really struggling and has a lot of issues, and but this really surprised me. I just thought it would be a sort of standard kind of biopic type story about a sinner type character that is very close to her, and it is very close to her own life, I think, in some ways, but is such a wonderful film, and really surprising and funny, as well as being very moving. And I was surprised by how emotionally struck I was by this film, but I think it is an incredible movie, but also has this whole like meta layer to it where there's like a scene where she goes to a drag bar and there's a drag queen that is impersonating her, as well as some other like famous women at the time, and yeah, so it's very funny and pointed but is very moving as well. There's another new film, a German film called Undine, about a female historian whose relationship is broken up, and it's so creatively told. It's almost like a fairy tale how it's told, and yeah, really interesting story, and yeah, and just the way it's told as well, and so I thought it was really moving and wonderful. And there is another new film, which I think is another one of my favorite films that I've watched this year, like absolutely in the top, which is Nomadland, which is directed by Chloe Zhao and starring Frances McDormand, who is a woman that is just she doesn't have any fixed abode. She since the death of her husband, she's just sort of traveled around the country and taken sort of odd jobs to support herself and get by, but joins other sort of nomadic communities and nomadic individuals across the country, and just about her many different encounters with people who have sort of fallen out of mainstream society and who just have a different rhythm to their lives and different from sort of mainstream society, and just find that they don't really fit in with that and are much more comfortable moving around a lot more. And I found it so moving as a sort of like alternate vision of American life, of different kinds of people in the country that she encounters. I thought it was so well done. It's an extraordinary film. Highly recommend it. Another new film I got to see at the London Film Festival. They had a much more toned down version of the London Film Festival this year, but they did show some movies in cinemas, and one of them was Ammonite, which is the new film directed by Francis Lee, who also made the film A God's Own Country. And but this is quite a different film in some ways, although it involves a same-sex relationship, but is a historical story set in 1840 about an archaeologist played by Kate Winslet who lives on the coastline and looks for fossils. And she takes as an apprentice a married woman, and they strike up a bond with each other and form this relationship. And it's so movingly done, and it's so wonderful to see Kate Winslet in a leading role again, because I think it's been quite a while since she's had a leading role in a film. But this film is wonderful, really moving and emotional, and beautifully shot and done. I also rewatched the extraordinary film Young Adult from that was out in 2011, but I think is one of my favorite films of all time, which is sort of strange, but yeah, I just think it's so well done. How Charlize Theron plays this author of young adult novels and goes back to her hometown to try to strike up a relationship with an old flame of hers who's since married and had a baby, and she's sort of jealous of all of that, and she tries to intrude upon their relationship. And she is such an awful character, but she's so mesmerizing to watch. I just completely gripped by this movie. Then there is a relatively recent film called Lucky Grandma, which is really interesting, like quirky story about a grandma who gets into gambling debt and then gets sort of caught in this like gang warfare, and it's such a like fascinating, unique story, and very funny and playful, as well as being one that I think you can really emotionally engage with her character and some of the other characters in the story. So I just really enjoyed that as such a unique movie. A series of films, of small acts films that have been directed by Steve McQueen, which has been showing on the BBC, and I've been really enjoying all these different films. There is Lover's Rock, which is a very low-key film about that sort of showing a dance, a sort of house party, and just a very observational film about the different characters and their relationships with each other, that just sort of watching them throughout the course of an evening evening, which I really enjoyed. I thought it's so beautifully done. I keep thinking about it. There's also the film Mangrove, about a restaurant in Notting Hill that suffered from a number of police attacks where that they would just sort of raid the restaurant and break things up and beat some of the owner and the workers there and the customers. And there's also the film Red, White and Blue, where a young black policeman, played by John Boyega, joins the police force and finds that he's sort of caught between the white police officers who have a very prejudiced view about him and really discriminate against him, and also the local community who feels like the local black community who feels like they've sort of betrayed him. And it's so moving and poignant how it portrays his dilemma. So yeah, I'd really highly recommend all of those film and watching that whole series of film. I think it's great that these have been produced and being shown on the BBC. It's showing a really important part of black British history, which hasn't really been portrayed before, and some of which I wasn't aware of before. So yeah, I think it's extraordinary. Then there is the film Monsoon, another new film about a British Vietnamese man who travels back to Saigon, which he left when he was a child and his family took him to Britain. But since his parents have died, he goes back to Saigon to spread their ashes. And it's about a relationship he forms with another man while he's there, but also just sort of searching his past and contemplating his identity as he visits all these different spots that he can barely remember from his childhood, and I just found it very movingly done. Then finally, the last film I want to recommend and that I rewatched was The Hours, the brilliant film about the life of Virginia Woolf and two different women in different periods of time, and has such extraordinary actresses in it, such extraordinary performances, such a moving story. I always cry when I watch this film, and I've rewatched it many times, and I just think it's such an extraordinary story about life and agency and so wonderful. So those are the films I want to talk about and recommend. But yeah, let me know if you've watched any of these, if you like them as well, or if you're interested in watching any of them now. And please do recommend some of your favorite films or TV series that you've watched over the past year that you want to recommend in the comments below. And please do, because yeah, I obviously have a lot more time to watch things over the course of the Christmas period and you know, in the months going forward. And so yeah, I'd really like some more recommendations as well. But I hope you're doing well and staying safe, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye bye.